Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler,
And my name is Brooke.
and this is
Cosmere
Cosmere Conversations. My friends from all around the globe, we have an incredibly important podcast announcement. Top of the podcast
Yeah.
really needs to be covered.
It's post spooky season, pre Dragonsteel Nexus. It's Cosmere season.
Yeah, it's
And
the time for
we
it.
are going to be at Dragonsteel Nexus on some panels this year. Again.
Yes, this is another opportunity for you to come check us out. We are going to be on 3 different panels this year. Incredibly blessed to be on 3 panels, and we want to let everybody know what they have in store. If you're going to be at Nexus, obviously come and check us out.
Yeah, come to our panels, come say hi. One of the coolest things last year was getting to meet people in person who listened to the podcast, who had thoughts and theories to tell us, because we sit here in front of our microphones and podcasting is not one of the platforms. It's one of the few platforms these days where there's not immediate feedback. Like there's no comment section. It's like hard to tell who we're reaching and how we're reaching them. And so it's really, really wonderful to get to meet you in person. So please come say hi if you're going to be there. Our first panel is going to be Stormlight Arc 2 Theories, Predictions, and What's Next. That's on Thursday. That's December 4th. It'll be at 11:30 a.m. in room 155, which is known as the Scadrial room.
And then on Saturday, we are on 2 different panels in the afternoon. The first, Villains of the Cosmere, that is at 2:30, also in the Scadrial. Actually, all of our panels are in the Scadrial room. And then the evening, Saturday night, 5:30. People define evening differently, but I think this is
5:30 is evening.
purely in the evening category. It's not the absolute latest of the panels, but it's going to be the Dragons of the Cosmere update panel.
Yeah, bringing in a lot of the knowledge that we've gotten from Isles of the Emberdark. I'm actually really excited about all 3 of these panels. Our groups are really fun. Lots of people who have great thoughts and theories, good things to say. We've got some fun kind of games and ways for our audience to participate at the panels. So if you're going to be there, would love to see you. Check it out.
Yes, and just like we did last year, we are going to try to capture the audio of these panels and release them eventually for all of the people who cannot be at Dragonsteel Nexus. But if you're going to be at Nexus, you should come check out the panels. And then for everybody else, we are hoping to be able to release the audio of the panels sometime in 2026, because there's normally an embargo. So you will eventually get a little peek behind the Nexus scenes. And until then, how about we dive deep into one of the most mysterious characters across the entire Cosmere, one of the oldest characters that we know about, neither dragon nor shard, but still incredibly important for all possible theorizing. This is Hoid and what he gets up to during Wind and Truth.
Yeah, with Wind and Truth and Isles of the Emberdark, we're just starting to get a little bit more information about exactly who Hoid is and what some of his abilities are. We will not be talking about Isles of the Emberdark today. This will strictly be focused on some of the big moments for Hoid in Wind and Truth. And one of them comes quite early when Hoid discovers the missing breaths from the end of Rhythm of War. This happens when Yasna wakes up in the night. She is sleeping beside her lover Hoid, and she finds Hoid panicked. Quote, he looked at her, eyes like glowing spheres, lips drawn, without even a hint of a smile, jaw taut, hands clenched, breathing quickly, genuine panic, end quote.
Maybe the only time we've seen Hoid with genuine panic.
For sure. Usually he's relatively calm, collected, in control. Even if there's a moment where he's like, ooh, something dramatic is happening, he kind of feels like he has at least a little bit of knowledge or control over the situation, and that is not the case in this instance.
Yeah, even the clash that we talked about in last episode between Risen and Hoid, the moment when the Dawn shards are pulling together, he seems to
Yeah.
be in control, or at least have some control over the Dawn shards and the present, giving that like strong command. But in this moment, he seems to be like figuring out something horrific. And we have kind of speculated in the past, a little bit based on words of Brandon, but that Hoyd is in part sane because of his awareness and knowledge and ability to segment pieces of his mind, his memory, maybe even his spiritual web. I don't know. But like to segment pieces of who he is into bits of investiture.
I mean, yeah, I think that's maybe phrasing it in a way that I wouldn't phrase it. I think the word of Brandon is that he stores his memories in breaths, and that is something that helps him stay sane. We know that the heralds, for example, a big reason why they are experiencing their magical maladies is due to their very long lives, which obviously has to do with their memory of all of the time that they've been alive. And so Hoyd is able to avoid that fate by storing memories in breaths.
In Wind and Truth, he kind of settles down at the desk and has a notebook, and he's making notations that look like a table of sorts in an alien script to Yasna's eyes. He also, of note and importantly, has some white sand out.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, a piece of something. Maybe he's measuring some aspect of his investiture because, well, I think white sand is kind of used as a way of like measuring.
Yeah, it can detect the presence of investiture and then can also be used as a kind of measuring mechanism. We've got a really long quote about what happens next, but truly almost every other word is important. And so it's worth reading. Maybe we'll split this about halfway through. Quote, the doors began to shake. Yasna had a sword in hand a second later, but then realized it was him. No one was on the other side. He was exerting some kind of pressure that made the doors vibrate. The rings in her jewelry box began to spill out onto the floor while her shoes scooted away, pushed by their buckles. Every bit of metal in the room, save for her shard blade, reacted to him, including her fabrial alarms, which went haywire, flashing rapidly. Then the sand burst alight with a mother of pearl iridescence and hovered above the table.
I think this is a good moment to pause the quote because it seems like this is allomancy. He's
Yes.
pushing against all of the metal, cannot push against invested things like the shard blade, but everything else is being triggered. And, Wax has kind of this ability on demonstration with his steel bubbles. He kind of pushes outward and metal goes out. Hoyt is doing that on a grander scale in this instance. But
Why?
exactly. Like, kind of what is going on? The fabrial alarms flashing rapidly, going haywire, and then the sand bursting alight. Again, I think he is like running through abilities rapid
Oh, he's, like,
fire.
testing all of his
I
abilities?
think so. Yeah, to like make sure
Mm,
that he's still got everything that he
yeah.
thinks he's got.
Yeah, he's doing, like, a body scan, but
Sure.
of his spiritual nature, maybe.
Yeah, his magical nature,
Yeah.
possibly. And then we have this continuing quote, Wit's silky nightclothes began to writhe and contort as if alive. His motions became increasingly frantic, fear spren bubbling up through the ground around them. Then, in a flash, his body shape physically changing, molded like wax, he became another person, shorter, with stark white hair and subtly different features. This is the real him, she realized, a man not from their world who masquerades as wit, but his change had been physical, not an illusion. End quote. And so on display, I think we have the movement of his clothes that is
Awakening.
awakening. And then the fear spren bubbling up. Now, obviously, on Roshar, there can be spren that react to emotions. And so Wit could have been legitimately afraid, attracting fear spren.
Yeah.
I also think because of everything else, the context, he might have been like summoning Spren, which is different
Well,
than something we've seen before.
it could be emotional allomancy, right?
Yes, and like, but like, yeah, so he is pushing in some way, heightening, and that like summons the spren in. I think he's afraid for sure. Like
Yeah.
he's demonstrating some fear, but it's also like an enhanced version. And so I like the concept of emotional allomancy.
And then his body changes, his
Yeah,
physical
wax.
body. It's not an illusion fading away, not even a really good illusion. It is a literal physical change of his body. He has some type of like actual shape shifting ability.
Yeah,
We know, and we have known for a while, that the way that Wit presents himself on Roshar is not his true form. He makes himself a little bit taller and he gives himself black hair, slightly different looks when he's on Roshar. Because in a lot of cases, looks are power. And so he makes himself look like someone who can have power in this world in the way that he wants to.
I also think that it's worthy of calling out that physical transformation of the body is something that the return can do and that Vasher can do.
Hmm.
They are not casting an illusion on themselves. They are actually physically changing their form.
Yes. Yeah, do you think that that's something that anyone with enough investiture, like, gets that power? Is that why Hoid can do it?
I think that maybe that's like good speculation. The heralds are able to recreate their body out of investiture, but it's also not an illusion. It's like a physical thing that they are making.
Yes, yes, but I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been thinking about Shalon and what
Of
it
course,
means
of
for
course.
her to be the daughter of a herald, and I keep wondering if it is possible for the heralds to change the body that they appear in,
Oh,
to
I think they
change their
could.
physical body. Yeah, that, like, maybe they just don't know that they have that ability or they don't know how, and that's the only reason why they don't do that?
Well, remember, at least with Shalon specifically, she does create illusions with physical weight. And is it Abadai, the monarch,
Yeah.
who says like that power was banned from you? And I think that there's something along those lines is what Shalon is doing, what she's like approaching with her abilities is either maybe something that was banned from the heralds, but it's just like innate with investiture. If you have enough control over investiture, you can create
I
real
mean, I don't
physical
think
things.
any investiture, but I could see it being like a certain threshold of investiture, right? Like the returned have the one divine breath
Hmm.
that gives them enough investiture to be able to access that ability.
Yeah, I mean,
You know, I don't
certainly.
think Kaladin, just like if he's invested, can manipulate his appearance.
Well, he can now at the
Okay.
end.
Yes.
But I do think that if we are just going with an amount, then it is like just an amount. The divine breath has a very specific amount of BEUs, and other characters can access that number of BEUs. For example, Nomad, who is Sigil, who is Zellion, is well beyond the fifth heightening, well beyond the amount of a divine breath. And
Mm.
therefore,
Hmm.
if you're just saying it's amount, then he can
Yeah.
manipulate his body as well. I do think that we don't know, but it's just speculation. Hoid is definitely beyond those amounts with his breaths and with other innate investiture that he has access to, but that's all on display. And then we have the white sand turning black and
Yes.
Wit saying that he has been tricked. Quote, he stood again taller than she was and held up what he'd written. I'm missing, Wit said, 3 minutes and 27 seconds. End quote.
So this entire process that he's gone through of sort of like emitting all of this investiture, whether he was purposefully cataloging his investiture or whether this explosion of magical abilities is like a side effect of the other thing that he's doing, very unclear, but this was all in pursuit of finding these missing minutes.
I agree. And that's why I think body scan, the way you said it, except for like spiritual scan, is a good concept. And that he was like testing and firing all of his abilities to.
I wonder if this is the like magical equivalent of like rifling through your room, you know, like imagine you're looking for your keys and
Where are they?
yeah, you're just like opening drawers and throwing clothes everywhere and like moving all the papers on your desk and changing everything, like throwing things around. I wonder if like that's what Hoid is doing in like his own spiritual DNA. And that's why like all this investiture is just sort of going crazy. It's like the metaphysical version of, throwing all of the clothes out of the drawer.
I like that idea. I also think there's something to we currently understand a connection between memories and breath, but there can be other forms of investiture that Hoyd is utilizing to maybe store other things. Like in Farukami, there are the abilities to store
Yeah.
memories. That's a copper mind, right?
Hmm.
And then you have all of the other different aspects of metals that can store things. What if Hoyd can store different things in other forms of investiture, not as like locked into the metals, but he can store bits of his memory in breaths. He can store bits of physical abilities in the allomantic spiritual realm that exists like right on the other side of the door that the metals unlock, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
And so, like, what he's doing is he's testing every single bit of investiture for the different ways he has stored up who Hoyd is. And this is huge speculation. Obviously, I'm
Yeah.
just guessing here.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's something to the concept of Hoyd is not one thing anymore. He's a thing that is spread across different bits of investiture, not unlike Voldemort with his Horcruxes, the
I don't
evil
know if I
version.
agree with that.
Oh, of course, it's
Yeah.
speculation. I'm just saying, like, Voldemort has the evil version of that on display, and Hoyd has perhaps the in neutral version of all of this on display when he's like taking bits of himself and spreading it out.
Maybe. There's just there's not really anything that we know about that other than the memories in breaths. But after this episode where he realizes that he's missing this 3 minutes, he comes to the realization that these missing minutes are from when he was having a chat with Odium. And he remarks on the fact that Odium wanted Hoyd to walk away feeling like he had bested him, and that this fact signals a huge change in Resa's usual sort of megalomaniacal personality. He says, quote, "He's grown. After 10,000 years, Reza has actually learned something. That terrifies me because if I can't anticipate what he will do," end quote. And then he goes back to the contract between Dalinar and Odium to look for potential loopholes. And Yasna's like, I mean, if you already like missed it in the contract, you're probably not gonna find it. Like you're the one that, wrote this in the first place and said that it was ironclad. And Hoyd's like, okay, yeah, you're right. I should probably find an expert and like another person to show this to who maybe has more knowledge than I do.
And it's a short list of people who have more
Yeah,
knowledge than Hoyd does.
exactly.
But he reaches out to one that we've heard of before, and we've talked about a little bit before on the podcast. He reaches out to Frost, describing him as, quote, "one of the best contract negotiators I know," end quote. Frost, however, is anti-interventionalist. He has said repeatedly that he wants nothing to do with the shards, or really just like seemingly anything
Yeah, no
going on.
current events.
Exactly. And therefore, Hoyd goes to Frost's sister. And I think this is the first mention of a sibling
Yeah.
of Frost.
Yeah.
But, another dragon on the list of dragons, and you can learn more about all of the potential dragons in the Cosmere at our dragon panel at Nexus. But I think that this one sets up a couple of interesting things. Hoyd is communicating via something
Yes.
with Frost's sister to help better understand this contract.
Quote, "Wit sat on the floor at the rear, holding a scroll of paper in one hand and some kind of white bone in the other," end quote.
We've seen these white bones a couple of other times mentioned. We still don't know about the specifics of the magic, but I believe Moray's had one.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, as a
In his little cabinet?
yeah, what was that in Words of Radiance?
Hmm.
But the white bones seem to be maybe related to Yolish magic.
Yes, I think that's pretty safe to say that it's related to Yolen. I think based on things that happen after this quote, this scroll of paper is like the Alethi legal code, or maybe just the contract that he's like reading to Frost's sister. So I don't think the scroll of paper is like specific to the magic that's enabling the communication, but the bone definitely seems to be some kind of key to this magical communication situation.
Yeah, I mean, I see it like a Scion in a way that is able to communicate across vast distances in the Cosmere. If the bone is like a wishbone and you like snap off pieces and the other person takes it, then it's kind of like a walkie-talkie across the
Oh,
Cosmere.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm wondering if it's like Frost's bone? Like, is
Maybe,
it a
yeah.
bone from the person you're trying to
Communicate
contact?
with. Sure, like, I could see
It's
that as
kind of
well.
weird.
Or just, like, separating 2 things, and then you have 2 axi across the Cosmere that are able to be a path of communication, something like that. But what we know is that this sets up the most important realization in Wind and Truth, the breaking of the agreement that Dalinar made with Race Odium, and the reason why eventually Retribution is going to be born, eventually why Dalinar loses and like does what he does at the end of Wind and Truth is because of this realization. We have, quote, it's not only against his nature, it's something he promised he would not do. Even without a formal covenant, a god cannot break that kind of promise without dire consequences.
So what? Dalinar said. I'm missing something.
As are we all, Wit said with a sigh. Odium is exploiting a loophole in your agreement. Rasa wouldn't do that. Rasa couldn't do that. So he looked around the room, meeting their eyes. So we are not facing Rasa, end quote.
And then he says that he confirms this hypothesis by sensing the rhythms of Roshar. I didn't know that was something that Hoid could do.
It is something that we see and talked about previously with El, who seems to immediately recognize that Taravangian is Odium when
Yeah,
Odium comes up to him.
but singers can hear the rhythms of Roshar. Like that's a singer thing.
I mean, it's a singer thing. It's a
Yeah.
person thing. Like
Well,
anybody
the
can,
humans can't.
unless your name's Navani and you start tapping a bit more, because the humans are, of course, of Roshar, just as the singers are at this point. Like they are part of Roshar.
Okay, but
Taln
this
is
is
able to
but it's
tap in.
not a normal thing.
It's normal to anyone who's paying attention. And Hoid obviously is paying attention.
Okay.
And it is something that he's able to connect and sense the rhythms of Roshar. And they are different because Odium is of Roshar and he is influencing the rhythms. We get that in the last book, and the importance of like understanding that it's not Honor and Cultivation's planet anymore. It's Odium's planet as well.
Yeah, but I think like the big thing to sort of come out of this, and I think we've talked about this on the podcast already, is the idea that the vessel can influence the rhythm of the shard, right?
Which
That
in turn then is influencing the rhythms of the planet itself.
sure, yeah. I think the quote rhythms of Roshar, he just means he's listening to the rhythms of Odium, honor, cultivation.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. There's also the rhythms of Roshar. Like that's the problem. There's also the magic and power of Roshar, which is what the heralds
What do you
tap
mean when
into.
you are saying that?
The power that is innate of Roshar that is different than Stormlight or Lifelight or
Which
Voidlight.
is speculated at this point.
It is
That's not
speculated,
a confirmed thing that we have any information about.
of course. I mean,
Yeah.
it's alluded to or directly made clear in Wind and Truth.
It's alluded to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talon and
I just want to
Ash,
be clear.
Talon and Ash do not use any Stormlight. They do not use power that is connected
Yes.
from the shards. They
I think
use,
it's said that they don't use surges.
yeah, and so they use something else, and
Yeah.
that's what we have called the power of Roshar. And I think that the wind, the stone, the night are more connected to that than say like the Stormfather. The Stormfather is somehow, wrapped up more with honor and like the power of honor and the shard. The Night Watcher to cultivation, but these other things are more about the planet itself, which has its connections back to Adenalcium.
But I don't think that's necessarily relevant in this particular circumstance. Like, Hoid is trying to confirm the identity of Odium. So he listens to the rhythm of Odium and is able to gather that that rhythm has changed enough in some way that the vessel has changed. That's the conclusion that he's able to come to. And this, of course, sets up the entirety of the plot of the book. But before we just speed on ahead, Hoyt has to do some work helping our main man, Kaladin. So the next time we see Hoyd, he is lounging on a couch in true Hoyd fashion. Kaladin sees him and we hear, quote, Eurythero had more and more furniture these days, including a couch here. It was, unfortunately, taken up entirely by Wit, who lay face up, filling the space that could have accommodated 3 people, his feet up on one armrest, reading a book and chuckling to himself, while a large globe of light hovered beside him. Some kind of odd spren? End quote. I
That
don't
large globe of light, I think, is definitely a Sion, but could be something else as well.
certainly seems like a Sion. It might even speak at some point. I can't remember. But I don't know if we've seen Hoyd with a Sion before.
Doesn't he communicate with Shallan via Sion?
Oh, yeah, I guess he does. So we know he has one. We just I don't think we actually like see it
Saw it.
on screen.
Right. And it's
Yeah.
like a different Sion than the one that Shallan has, which
Yes.
is Ava.
Allah.
Allah.
Yeah.
So like that is a bond, I think, in
Yeah, I think
a kind of like
so.
similar way
Mhm.
to the Nahil bond. There's so many bonds.
I
There's
know.
there's a lot of
Hoyd's got
bonds.
so much going. Like, this is just another sort of check mark. We just saw, all of these magical powers emanating out of him. Here's another one to add to the list. And Hoyd tells Kaladin that he should learn to play the flute that Hoyd gave him. And Kaladin's like, "Oh yeah, sorry, my bad." And Hoyd's like, "Oh look, actually, I have a flute on me right now. You could start learning to play. Let me teach you." And he starts teaching Kaladin the song that Hoyd played him when he was telling the story of the Wandersail. Although this flute that Kaladin is learning on, Hoyd says it, is basically the same. He's going to be able to play it the same way, but this flute doesn't have the same capacity as the previous flute that Hoyd gave him. So there's something special about the specific flute that Kaladin ends up playing throughout the entirety of Wind and Truth. And I don't know, do you remember if there's any like material mentioned that like the flute's made out of a special material or something? Like, what's special about that particular flute?
I don't remember a specific metal mention that it is made out of. It would be, interesting if there was a connection to emotional allomancy or some like other type of allomantic significance to the metal of the flute.
I'm
But
thinking maybe something even more like outside of our experience. Like, what if his flute is made out of like another white bone from Yolen or something?
I think that's a really good call. I mean, having just seen the white bone kind of on display, and I think, many instruments historically on Earth were made out of bone.
Yeah.
And so that would kind of make sense to me.
Or maybe like wood. There we know there's some like weird white
Hmm.
trees on
Hmm.
Yolen. Like maybe it's made out of a weird Yolen tree.
What I do think is important is that he tells Kaladin to practice the flute until he can make the music come back to him because, quote, that will mean Roshar is listening, end quote. And this
Mhm.
brings me back to what I was just talking about, the power of Roshar being
Yeah.
uniquely separate and kind of represented by the wind in Wind and Truth.
Yeah, the idea of like the entity of Roshar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we see this play out by the time we get to, Kaladin's story, which we'll talk about in a lot more detail eventually. That's exactly what he's going to accomplish. He's going to play outward with the flute, DJ Stormbless style, and then Rashar is going to return some power because of it.
I'm wondering if, like, when Adonalsium created Roshar, we know that he invested the planet at least enough for the spren to start to form, some
Hmm.
of the spren,
Yeah, yeah.
the ones that predate honor and cultivation. And perhaps the planet is invested enough that the people living on it who, think of their planet, think of their home, start to help it gain some kind of, I hesitate to say sentience, but, some kind of awareness. As we know that investiture starts to gain awareness if it is left alone for long enough.
Yeah, I mean, the fractal nature that we always talk about, Pat G is something that has a
Right.
sentience of some sort. It
Yeah.
makes decisions, it guides Dusk and other people to accomplish its goals in protecting itself. And so, why could the same not be true about Roshar as a planet or the Rosharan system of three planets working together?
Mhm.
I think that's totally a possibility. We're brought back to this story of Darethil and the Wandersail, and we learn from Wit that it is, quote, the rhythm that guided humans across the void from one planet to the other. They followed it to reach your world.
One of the rhythms of Roshar, Syl said with a nod, made into a song with the tones of the gods. End quote.
And so this is confirmation a little bit of, things that we've speculated or things that we have heard about previously, but, given the detail of like the song that we know connected to the story of the Wandersail is made of the tones of the gods.
Yeah. And also, he mentions that when he says, or when Syl says the tones of the gods, that this is referring to gods older than the ones that Kaladin is like familiar with. I'm unclear whether he is referring to the heralds as the people that the Alethi revere generally, or if he's referring to honor and cultivation. I think it makes more sense if he's referring to the heralds and that the tones referenced are the tones of honor and cultivation being sort of mixed with the natural rhythm of the planet Roshar, especially because as far as we know, before honor and cultivation there is only one Adonalsium, so gods plural would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I suppose. I think that the rhythm can exist in a natural state, right? The waves crashing on the shore, that's a rhythm. It is then taken by the gods, honor and cultivation, with their tones,
Yeah.
and magnify that repeatedly, vary it, change it, and it
Yeah.
becomes a song.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of like the 1, 2, 3. But like the rhythm is prior to honor and cultivation, and then it's manipulated into something else through them or via them.
Yeah.
And we know that this is the song that Kaladin's going to be, playing throughout his journey. And eventually Nail remarks that like he was there when
Yeah.
Darethel did his sailing. And then we have this quote, when this world was created long before honor, cultivation, or odium arrived, Adonalsium left something behind on it. Sometimes it's called the old magic. That term is often applied to the Night Watcher who came with cultivation's efforts from one of those ancient spren. End quote. So many like lore drops confirming things that we had speculated, but this is like the hard textual proof. The Night Watcher using cultivation or coming from cultivation is the child of, the creation of the ancient spren, which would be the night in that case.
Right. Yeah. So the night, the wind, and the stone are the entities that sort of make up the old magic, which is a remnant of Adonalsium's investiture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even the old magic is more of an umbrella term. And it's just like the old magic is closely related to the ancient spren. The ancient spren then get filtered down. One of them becomes the Night Watcher. But I would say, yeah, the old magic is not only the ancient spren. They are,
I mean, we'll find out. I'm just saying what this quote is saying.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he says sometimes it's called the old magic, that thing that was left behind.
Yeah.
And I think the ancient spren is something separate because it's then applied to the Night Watcher. But we have a concept of like listen to the wind when it speaks, wind being capitalized. And so it's like giving us all of this important to these three ancient spren. and the concept that like Hoid and Kaladin are talking about is that the wind starts asking Kaladin for help, and
Yeah, and
that's
Kaladin's like, okay, clearly Hoid knows something about this sentient wind that is speaking to me." And so he asks Hoid, like, "Is the wind a god?" And Hoid says, quote, "The only true god I've known is the one we rejected and killed," end quote. And I think that's just a good piece of information for us to have as we start to put together the picture of Adonalsium, who/what Adonalsium was, and kind of the events surrounding the shattering.
certainly, and like all of the things after are some type of lowercase god. If
Sure.
it's the ancient spren, if it's the heralds, if it's the shards,
I mean, and potentially the Aethers.
potentially the
Yeah,
aethers.
since apparently Adonalsium was the only true capital G god that Hoid has known. And Hoid does at least know about the Aethers.
Yeah,
So,
I think interestingly, he does not display any aether abilities. I think
yeah.
that's like the one thing that we've never seen him, and like they need the little crystal in the hand.
Well, I
Uh,
think there's an element of like choice. Like they would have to sort of approve him, you know? And I feel like the Aethers are probably like, "Nah, dude, we're not giving you our power."
yeah, of course, my speculation is the aethers are kind of like the Cosmere's force, and so like they're everywhere all through. And it's like the force is not a god. Like a god is the like entity Adonalsium that has like conscious choice. The force is just there. It's just present. And so like I would still say that lines up. I still think that the aethers can be 100% separate from Adonalsium's power and not have, and Hoyd knows about them and also doesn't go, that's a god, because why would you look at the force and call it a god?
We disagree, but okay. I think one thing to note about this conversation that Hoyd and Kaladin have is that Hoyd continues to sort of evolve in this book in presenting himself in a way that's very different from the way that we see him in previous books. He's much more serious and straightforward throughout this conversation. There's much more of his kind of true personality as far as we can tell. His worries start to come out. We start to see him be less confident, less sort of flippant about the things that are happening. And he warns Kaladin that the end is coming. He warns him that it's going to be really hard and that not even Hoyd really knows what's going to happen, which I think he mentions is quite unusual for him.
Let's jump over to Hoyd and Dalinar because they also have important conversations.
Yeah, all the way at the end of the book. We started at the beginning, we're going straight to the end. When Dalinar comes back from the spiritual realm, he meets Wit and they have this conversation. Quote, "Wit, did you know the Stormfather held Tanavast's memories?"
He's a kind of off-white, half-finished version of his cognitive shadow, Wit said with a nod. A replica of Tanavest, maybe an avatar, that had taken on its own will.
With his memories. Tanavast put them all into the Stormfather. It's like he is Tanavast more than we thought. He showed me the entire history of the gods on this planet and has known all along what happened in the years we were seeking. Dalinar hesitated. "I think I need to see and experience them anyway. But still..."
Wit cocked his head. Huh.
"You didn't know?"
Dalinar, I only pretend to know everything. End quote.
A good reminder that while Wit does know a lot, he is still kind of making it up as he goes along, and he does not have all of the answers. I think this is also an interesting look and perspective on cognitive shadows,
Certainly.
being a replica of the person that has sort of taken on its own will. This is supporting my idea that cognitive shadows are not the same as the original person.
Right. And it is a kind of clear separation from the entity that existed previously. I, of course, apply this to literally everything else we see in the Cosmere. So I see heralds and I say, that is not the thing that came before.
Yeah, that's
Kaladin,
because they're cognitive shadows.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Returned, that is not the thing that came before.
I know. I feel like this is a divisive.
It is. I
take.
mean, we've
A
talked
lot of
about it
people
so much.
do
Yeah.
not like the idea that cognitive shadows are a different thing. And I think in particular, now that Kaladin
Mhm.
is a cognitive shadow, like I could see people being really upset if we said like, no, Kaladin is dead.
Yeah.
There's a cognitive shadow of Kaladin, and that is a different thing.
And I think previously it was applied to Kelsier, Thydakar, and that kind of concept of no, the person that I know, the person that I connected with is still around. Where I see it most clearly, and like everyone kind of seemingly admits that there's a distinction and a separation,
Yeah.
is with Dalinar and the Blackthorn.
Yes.
People are very easily saying like Dalinar is gone and dead and he went to the beyond. But
Yeah.
the Blackthorn is this new thing, like a spiritual realm cognitive
I know.
shadow that's been born.
I mean, we can't go on
I
an
know.
entire
We will.
tangent about the Blackthorn, but I think the difference is that the Blackthorn is clearly one aspect of Dalinar's personality. And in other cases, like Kelsier or Tanavast or something, it's like more that the entirety of them turns into a cognitive shadow.
I mean, yeah,
But that's a topic
you're saying it's
for
the entirety. I don't think it's the entirety. I think it's just like other pieces. It's their cognitive self, which is not the entirety of them, because I think the entirety of them
yeah, but that's
requires,
different
yeah,
than what's
the
happening. And we'll talk about that in our Blackthorn episode.
I totally agree, but I do just think this is like again another important like lore drop that we're getting from Wind and Truth, and like why this book is so important and like has so much. But I also think it's important to remember that Dalinar is saying this. Hoid is acknowledging that he didn't know about it.
Yeah, he like didn't know that this aspect of Tanavast persisted.
And I also think we shouldn't rush to be like, Dalinar is 100% correct.
Of course.
Dalinar can also be wrong about this. And then he's presenting the information, and Wit's like, huh, I didn't know that. And Dalinar's like, well, it's correct because I saw it. But like, you don't know what you saw. You were on a magical journey through the spiritual realm. And so, like,
I guess.
there's
I mean,
multiple
I think
questions of what is real. You never can, like, be 100% certain. And that's a good reminder when it comes to Hoid or anybody else.
we continue to get more information about Wit, Hoid, and his backstory. In true Hoid fashion, he tells a story to sort of bring Dalinar into this next phase as he is walking to the contest, that, everything has led to this. But this time, instead of telling a fictionalized story that's either entirely made up or, based on real events, but manipulated for storytelling purposes, instead of those circumstances, which is what he's always done in the past, he tells a true story from his own kind of his own life, like a story that he participated in some way. Quote, long ago, Wit said softly, on a planet where half the trees are white, a child was born to a lumberman, a curious, whimsical child who wanted all of the answers in the world, but such were not offered to the children of common laborers. Even kings and jesks didn't have all the answers, though we often lied about that fact, and still do, end quote.
This begins the bet, the gamble that Hoid is going to be a part of, where the king of the land starts to, wonder and question, and eventually makes a bet with all the nobles that he can bring any common child to the palace, raise them as a noble, and they will be just as smart and talented as anyone who was born noble. Basically testing out nature versus nurture.
Right. This idea that there's some reason why some people have power and some people don't have power, that there's something like innate.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
obviously the noblemen are like, no, we're innate in our own world.
We're
Just be like,
obviously better.
we are touched by God, and God is like given us authority and
Right.
power over other people. These nobles seem to believe something similar. You could never bring the son of a lumberman and teach them. And that's exactly what happens. The lumberman's son brought to the palace, raised as a noble, and
Dalinar has the same question that I had as I heard the
while
beginning
reading,
of
yeah.
this story. I was like, oh my God, is this Hoid's origin story? So Dalinar is like, oh, were you the lumberman's son? And Hoid says, no. Quote, I was young then, frightfully so. I'd somehow found a weapon destined to kill a god and was carrying it unwittingly, end quote. Wow. So seemingly Hoid stumbled upon a Dawn Shard when he was young. I think there's a question of like what Hoid considers young. Does he actually mean a child? Or does he mean like I was 30, but now I'm,
Of
10,000, so
course, yeah.
30 is
Everything
very
is young.
young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, he was probably closer to his mortal lifespan or whatever the humans on Yolin
I
were
think like
rocking about.
not child,
Yeah,
probably,
definitely. Yeah,
you know?
he's an adult. He seems to have the Dawn Shard that he will eventually give up, and then he will eventually pick up again, and then at the end of Wind and Truth, give to Sigil.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so this does answer the question of like, why was Hoid important? He was already one of the most important people in the Cosmere
Mhm.
when the 16 go about trying to kill Adonalsium. He might have been the impetus in some way if they looked at Hoid and were saying, you have the thing that we need, the weapon. You have a piece of the weapon. We just need to collect the other ones. If
Mhm.
he was like the example of a Dawn Shard that gave everyone else the idea, it kind of makes sense his place in
Yeah, I
the
think
16.
whether or not he was like the first person to have a Dawn Shard, the fact that he was carrying a Dawn Shard is probably the reason that he was involved in the shattering at all. And also could be why he was not chosen to be a vessel or why he didn't volunteer to be a vessel. As we see with Sigil holding the Dawn Shard and Hoid kind of recommending, don't take any other investiture on.
Mhm.
Basically, don't make another Spren bond when you're holding this Dawn Shard. I could see it being a similar thing where he was like, oh, well, I'm already holding the Dawn Shard, so I can't really take a shard after we shatter Adonalsium.
To the story of the lumberman's son. He was raised up, given education and training as a noble, and to win, and for the king to win the bet, the lumberman's son must pass at least one of three different tests: swordsmanship, history, recitation, and composing poetry. Or I guess, or composing poetry, because he
Right.
only needs to win one. I
Yes.
find this very interesting because falls into physical, cognitive, and spiritual if you count poetry
Hmm.
as
Sure.
connecting to something spiritual.
Hmm.
But he fails at all of them.
Yes. And Dalinar sort of interjects here saying like, "Hey, that doesn't make any sense. You can't draw conclusions about the entirety of a populace based on one boy being tested. Like, what if that one guy was just really bad at reciting history, And then you're going to extrapolate that out and say, well, obviously this means that poor people deserve to be poor
Yeah, Dalinar, it's a little bit like dividing your population based on who has light
based
eyes
on
and who
eye
has
color,
dark
yeah.
eyes.
Yeah, but I think this is a huge moment that marks the growth that Dalinar has gone through, throughout his journey. We start with him kind of like the king, starting to wonder, why don't we have shard shovels? And he that same mindset is coming back here in an even more kind of refined way as he says, even when you recognize that there is a problem, this is not really a great way to solve it. And at this point he starts to feel more confident after he sort of makes this observation. I think there's some way in which it makes him feel connected to his own values. And there may also be some emotional allomancy going on. I'm curious if Wit is like rioting his confidence emotions here.
Trying to hype him up for the contest that
Yeah,
he's about to walk into. That seems
exactly.
very Wit-esque.
Yeah.
But it's important because Wit acknowledges I was one of the judges of the
Yes.
poetry section. And he wasn't able to stop the lumberman's son from failing. He failed what should have been an unfailable test because
Yeah.
Wit says, as long as the boy showed up and said anything original,
Yeah, I
he
think
was
he
going to
even says,
win.
like, he could have burped,
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
would have been like, "Yeah, I mean,
That's
that's
it. Poetry,
original,
baby.
so, like, you pass."
However, we hear this quote, the lumberman's son found the only way to lose an unlosable contest. He didn't show up, end quote. And then Dalinar goes on to ask, quote, what became of the lumberman's son in the end?
He went to war, fought, bled, learned, loved. He returned with vengeance one day and killed the barons. A remarkable tale, in fact. Wit held his eyes. We never have all of the answers, Dalinar. On one hand, that contest was unlosable because I'd have validated the poem no matter what. On the other, it was unwinnable because the coup was well underway and the contest was pointless, except at the same time not. The contest's existence caused the coup, so while it mattered very much, the results didn't.
Just as it didn't matter, Dalinar said, if one boy could prove himself better than Elidi's, the people deserved better lives anyways.
Yes, end quote. And I think this says at least a little bit about Dalinar's contest and the way that it is very important. Like the outcome absolutely matters. And like on some level also doesn't matter in the way that it's not going to solve all of the problems. And we see that it doesn't solve all of the problems.
And the division that Hoid is laying out, there's a contest, there's a way to win, there's a way to lose, and the boy lost. But at the same time, winning and losing didn't necessarily matter. And I think that aspect is what Dalinar kind of latches onto when he eventually is going to realize this contest that I am in is not pointless, not without meaning,
Yeah.
but that the concept of winning or losing is pointless. And I'm going to break the system rather than
Yeah.
try to just go down the road and like lose bravely or whatever. Like he's
Yeah.
not just going to walk into defeat. He instead is going to destroy the contest.
Yeah, I think also both Dalinar's story and this story are sort of highlighting the idea that for most of us, we're not at the climactic end. We're in the middle. And neither one of these people get to be the person that solves it all, that like makes the big decision that fixes everything and is the one true thing that will be the answer to everything in the universe. They're in the middle of the story that is long. Not that they don't have a role to play, but that in a lot of ways they are not the main character. Even Dalinar, who has so much power, who is the person that's been elected to go through this contest, he's not all powerful. At the end of the day, like he is not even really going to be the main character of the finale of the Cosmere.
Certainly.
He's one player.
Exactly. He is merely a person that we followed and had focus on.
Yeah.
But he is not the only player, and he's maybe not even the most important player, the most significant player.
Yeah, he's nudging the boulder.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
he's not, taking a hammer to the boulder and breaking the entire thing.
We get a couple more tidbits, including with saying that he cannot see the future, possibly because of Dalinar's connection to Renarin. And so he doesn't know the right story to tell. This, of course, implies that Wit can normally see the future.
Yeah. Is this a side effect of the Dawn Shard? I don't know why he would have this power that is so rare throughout the Cosmere. But then I wonder about the Dawn Shard because it doesn't seem like Sigil gets that power when he takes the Dawn Shard. So
Right.
what the heck? Why can Wit see the future in any way?
I mean, I think that there are two elements that kind of are in Wit's favor. One is time. When you know the past, you have the ability to more accurately predict the future. And this is
Hmm.
just any example of humanity. Like, why are we better than all the other animals on Earth? It's in part because we have the ability to predict future outcomes based on past observations.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's something more magical here than just that.
Yes, I think that that's the baseline, is that he has seen a lot and therefore is better. But then I also think the capital C connection is where future sight finds its way and its strength. And Hoyd does have a lot of capital C connections across the Cosmere. And so that would be my, like, the magical aspect is like, A, he's just better suited to being able to see the future or understand the current events and how those lead to future outcomes. And then B, he has a lot of capital C connection, which would serve as a way of like seeing the network as it kind of spiders out. And what we have heard multiple times about when characters get a glimpse of shard power, it's like they see all of the possible
Yeah.
futures.
Yeah.
And if Hoyd can know how the connections are operating, it's again not seeing the future. It's like having a wider view on all possibility. But he can't do that because Renarin is the game breaker in that he like blocks that ability.
Yeah.
Let's move us towards the end of Hoyd's involvement and towards the end of Wind and Truth as well.
One side note to mention here at the end, during this whole section, there's a quote from Hoyd that I found extremely noteworthy. He says, quote, "Before us were the dragons, before them, the gods," end quote. So the gods came before the dragons. Dragons are hella old. They're, 10,000 plus years old. Who are the gods?
It is a lowercase g. And
Yes,
earlier we
but
talked
it's
about,
plural.
yeah, we said that Hoid made mention of like the only thing that he recognized as a true god is the one he killed, which is Adonalsium.
Correct. Yes.
So I am very confused about those 2 points back to back. When you like, okay, well, if the only god that you've ever interacted with was Adonalsium, and you're saying before us, that's talking about the shards or like the shard generation. Before us were the dragons. So the
Right. So
dragons
like
came before.
humans, I assume he means,
Sure.
us humans. Before us, there were dragons.
And before them, the gods. I
Who are the gods?
Yeah, I feel like this is where you could just make any statement and it has equal validity to anything else.
Of course. I mean, everything is just pure speculation.
Yeah, I mean, you could
Can
say,
I tell you like some of my thoughts?
yeah, hit me with some. Obviously, there's going to be no real answer here.
No proof at all. One possibility, before there was Adonalsium, there were shards. There were like separate shards that then got combined into Adonalsium, and then Adonalsium was shattered into the shards that we know now.
This would kind of be a little bit of the Battlestar Galactica model where like everything that is now was this way before, and you're on like a repeating cycle
Sure. Yeah.
of development and fall and development and fall and
So
development and
like
fall.
my thought is maybe that's why the people were like, "Oh, this
course.
is for your own good." Like
It's putting
you
it back to
used
the
to
way
be this way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're resetting to the way things were before.
Exactly.
But then, the end of the Cosmere, and it would be this loop where we have at the end of our understanding of the Cosmere, there is
they would
a
be
coming together.
recombining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this leans into some fan speculation because Brandon is a huge fan himself of the Wheel of Time. And that's always talking about how this is another turning of the wheel, but it's like kind of telling the same story over and over on a loop.
Yeah.
It's just another. So this would be like the Cosmere's Wheel of Time theory. I think that obviously I love myself some Aethers. I think that they are not necessarily of Adonalsium, believing what we hear from Twin Soul.
Right.
And so like maybe the gods are the Aethers because we know there are multiple of them, but then Hoid doesn't look at them for reasons I said earlier. He doesn't look at them as capital G God, but he acknowledges them as like the gods, as in like the things that came before.
Yeah, but then if he would just be referring to the Aethers, then did the Aethers create Adonalsium?
I think you could say that because everything comes from the Aethers in the same way that a tree comes from the soil. And so you could be like, yeah, the Aethers are
were not God, but created God.
Exactly. And so like the mightiest tree in all the land, a great sequoia or whatever, redwood, that is Adonalsium, and it is the biggest tree in the entire Cosmere. Maybe even you could call it the world tree, but it came from soil and it came from something older than it itself. And that would be the Aethers.
Or I think it could just be referring to Adonalsium and the Aethers, and maybe that's why the G is not capitalized, because he's like throwing them all together, and he only considers Adonalsium the capital G.
That would be very goddess. That would be, really looking at your god and being like, that's the only one that counts. Come on, Hoid, you've seen all the gods across the Cosmere.
I don't know.
Can't lock in on the one. It's mainly just fun speculation. Do you have any more?
No, I was just going to say, I would really love to hear from the audience. Like, please get in the comments, patrons, get on the Discord. Tell us what you think about this 2 sentences. That means a lot.
Before us were the dragons, before them, the gods. Let us know what you think. And let us move towards the end.
Yes. Okay. After all of the things, at the very end of the book, we have Hoid being vaporized by odium after he gives the Dawn Shard to Sigzil. This is a wild scene. Hoid runs into the room. He gives Sigzil a brief sort of description of what's about to happen. And then, quote, he held up a device made of several gears and what appeared to be glowing light, not trapped in a gemstone, but in an hourglass. I'm sorry for how this will feel, but the Dawn Shard should keep you alive, end quote. He sticks this device to Sigil and he pushes Sigil away from him. Sigil then falls into Shadesmar. So this seems to be something similar to an Elsegate Fabrial that transports him.
And I think that we heard a little bit from the spiritual realm shenanigans that Elsgating was the original ability that helped move everybody from Ashen to Roshar.
Right.
And
yeah.
so like the baseline of that power, that surge, Elsegate transportation, isn't exclusive to Else callers.
Correct. Yeah. As we have to remind ourselves of over and over again, the surges are not specific to Roshar. Surges generally just mean sort of the base functions of the Cosmere that are able to be accessed by different magic systems. And so the transportation surge is able to be accessed by other types of magic. I think that this Fabrial is not a Rosharan Fabrial.
I agree.
Yeah. Like maybe it's a Cellish Fabrial using the door with the glowing,
hourglass
the
is
glowing
interesting.
light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could throw things out, but it's just, nonsense at this point to really speculate other than to say, like, would you put it in the camp of a modern device or an ancient device?
I would say ancient. I could
Okay.
be wrong.
Yeah.
But we also have to remember that Elantris is way far in the past of the Cosmere.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Way has been flexing a little bit as Brandon continues to write. We used to think it was very, very far in the past. And now we have characters who were around during the Rose Empire who are still alive when we get to Mistborn Era 2.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people alive for a long time.
That's
so
true. That's true.
That doesn't really mean anything.
It's not a definitive statement, but I do think that, yes, the timeline has become a little mushed together. And I'm kind of wondering if there's any possibility about this being a more modern device. To me, that would actually point to Cell. That would point to something modern and unique on Cell. The older you go, the more I want to go back to Yolen or some other, ancient society.
I mean, we have the Irie building cities in the cognitive realm in Mistborn Era 1.
Yeah, which
So,
would have
like,
been
the Elantrians
300
have...
years standard time before Era 2, and we know that Hoid's about to
Right.
drop into Era 2.
Yeah.
And so it would have been 300 years prior to that, the Irie were.
Right. So, like, the Elantrians are, I think, quite developed.
And it would make sense that they need some type of Elsegate technology. They could walk through any, shard pool to get into the cognitive realm. But if they had a
Yes.
device that allowed them to move people on
Yeah.
purpose, that would like
Right.
give them a lot more staying power in the cognitive realm. So
Yeah.
I think like there's this question of when is this device developed? And it's certainly interesting, but Hoid has his hands on it. He gives it to Sigil, right? So that's like Sigil's device now.
I don't think we see Sigil, like, have it with him after this. That doesn't mean he doesn't. It's just not mentioned.
Okay.
Hoid says, Hoid, like, sticks it to Sigil.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's like a one use situation. Like, does it just disappear after a use? Maybe. I don't know. Then Hoid gets immediately vaporized and he wakes up on Scadrial in the home/laboratory of Ulam the Khandra, aka the doctor from Tress of the Emerald Sea.
Quote, his body regenerated from the largest piece of flesh he had remaining. He'd always known this, but had never found opportunity to, weaponize it, end quote.
New information about Hoid. He is basically indestructible because he has somehow figured out a way to regenerate his body from the largest piece of flesh.
And that's without a Dawn Shard. You have to just like completely give into speculation of how he's accomplishing this.
Right.
But I feel like it's healing beyond anything that we have
Oh my
seen,
gosh.
of
Yeah.
course. But it also like, are we into now another type of conversation about cognitive shadows, bringing us over to like the Star Trek realm? They're always talking about the transporter, that like, if you destroy a person here and recreate them atom by atom somewhere else, did you move that person or did you
Sure.
create a clone
The
and a
ship
replica?
of Theseus.
Yeah. So is Hoid ship of Thesisine across the Cosmere, or did he move across. I think he is not Hoid anymore. He's like a new version of himself. And then it's interesting, and it's maybe different than the ship of Theseus because of the investiture, which, following the laws of conservation of investiture, would say that it cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be moved
Mhm,
around.
mhm.
And so, like, if he puts
Okay.
enough of himself into the investiture, then he's just rebuilding a body, and then himself is from the investiture coming back and tying back everything together.
And that's why I think he is the same person.
I would say, yes, he is the same person. The Star Trek example is not the same person because of that difference. Is like there is no investiture in that system. In this system, he is like, I mean, you're nodding your head or off mic.
I mean, then you have to say, like, do souls exist in the Star Trek universe? Like, is the soul vaporized or is it hanging out? And then the soul is going back into the body that's been recreated. And we can't answer those questions.
I do think that there's something specifically different about what Hoyd is able to accomplish because of his investiture, because of everything we've talked about in this episode and his ability to like move aspects of his memory and himself out of his physical body.
There
And
is there's an interesting moment with Hoyd right after he regenerates and like wakes up. Quote, great art, Wit whispered, running his hand through his hair, which was white in this body, is about what? About novelty. Yes, it comes back to novelty once again, you see. End quote. This stuck out to me because he seems to be sort of like reminding himself of something that he knows or something that he believes. You know, this is the beginning of a monologue that we've heard him deliver before.
yeah,
And he's sort of remembering it as he goes, right? He like pauses. He's like, wait, what's the next word? How does it go again? Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, now I'm kind of remembering who I am, remembering this piece of knowledge that is sort of important to who I am at my core. It could also be a commentary on his own newness, aka novelty.
yeah. And I know that like we're just going off the speculation deep in, but you also have sci-fi stories like Westworld, where you have, you know, robots with a consciousness that's constantly being destroyed and rebuilt. And then how many times does that happen? You know, if you put your consciousness into another, is that you or is that different? If they have trauma that's different from the trauma you experienced, how does that impact them? And I think what Hoyt is doing here is he's saying something that's meant to like form the capital C connection to the memories or the soul, however you know, want to think about it. But he's like trying to make the connection
Hmm.
back to link into the novel thing, the new body. And
Yeah, this is like his little spinning top in the Inception
exactly.
world to
Yeah.
like remind him who he is.
Right. And it's like
Yeah.
in that world, you like can't let anybody touch or manipulate your totem because then they could be tricking you about the dream state. It needs to
Hmm.
be like unique to you and something
Yeah.
only you know. Hoyd is saying this thing which quote unquote Hoyd knows. Like he believes deeply that
Right.
great art is about novelty. The new thing that has just been born, that physical body, maybe doesn't know anything at all until he makes the connection back to Hoyd memories. And then it starts to like flow through him. And he's like, yes, that's it. That's who I am. That's the totem. That's the reminder.
It's very interesting. Hoyd then, you know, sort of once he comes to himself, is very concerned for Roshar. He even calls it a place that is dear to him. And his immediate response is to want to rush back to Roshar and try to help fix things. But Ulam reminds him that he would just be stuck in Roshar's slowness bubble, and therefore he would be unable to help anywhere else in the Cosmere, like right here on Scadrial, where, quote, events are transpiring, autonomy is moving. I have a message I'm certain is from Taldane, though the planet should be unreachable, end quote. And so this is setting us quite firmly at the beginning of Mistborn Era 2. We're already starting to learn that things are starting to move in the Cosmere. Autonomy is getting involved. For some reason, Taldane is supposed to be unreachable, and yet we're getting messages from that planet. Lots of intrigue.
We also hear that the movement of Hoyd left design behind.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that we have understood a bond maintaining in some way,
Yeah.
and like being separated off of Roshar. He says that design is alone, and his former apprentice carried a vitally powerful artifact, unaware of the damage it would do to his soul, setting us up for the Sunlit Man and that story that we follow of Sigil becoming Nomad, becoming Zellion.
Hoyd does mention that he specifically put protections in place for Design in case something like this happened. He and Design are still bonded, but he is too far away to use his light weaving powers. I'm curious if this is due to the change on Roshar that gives Spren more freedom, or would this have always been possible just on the power of Hoyd's protections alone?
I feel like some part of the protections that we see in play when it comes to Yumi is like blocks. Like he just like
Uh-huh.
sections off aspects of himself. In that case, turning himself into a
Yeah.
hat rack. But I think that that's his main method of protecting. So I imagine he had the bond with design, part of his spiritual realm, and then he built a little fortress around it and
Yeah.
separated
So
that
that it
out,
like couldn't be manipulated in any way.
including by the separation of himself from Rashar, which should break the bond or, destroy some type of connection. But for him, it's just like over here in a
Weird.
weird
Yeah.
spiritual realm bubble, maybe that he has built around design. Who knows? But we have this quote, he closed his eyes, took a small bone from his pocket, and reached out to the meditative realm of the dragons where he'd always been an interloper. There, he sought the wisdom of the ancient dead who could see far more clearly, if you knew how to get them to talk to you. From them, he discovered something he had never suspected. Dalinar Kholin had been an absolute storming genius. End quote.
The debut of the dragon meditation realm, what the heck, where Hoyd is able to talk to ancient dead dragons who are just like, oh yeah, let me give you some perspective from my hundreds, potentially thousands year old life.
This is something that we see in Isles of the Emberdark. This is also when we're going to start just like bringing in more clearly the Emberdark nature and revelations that we have from that story. There is a spiritual or cognitive realm, land of the dragons. And this is something that we also see in Isles of the Emberdark. And we'll talk more about what that means and kind of like the specifics of what happens there. But there
Unless you come to our dragon panel, then you'll get the full thing.
we have this kind of like understanding of the dragons existing. Hoyd is able to communicate with them. And this is where he learns the important fact of Dalinar's rejection of the contest, violating his oath with the Stormfather, breaking the rules of the contract, releasing odium, creating retribution, all of that seeming like a terrible thing. But in reality, it forces the hands of everyone else across the Cosmere, forces the hands of all of the shards, and puts attention on to now retribution, where previously they may have been able to go hundreds or even thousands of years of slowly developing Taravangian with his powers. Now all focus is on retribution.
Right. Quote, he demanded that action be taken, and retribution had been forced to turn from Roshar to deal with greater foes. At first, Hoyd had worried that this would destroy Roshar. But no, of course it wouldn't, because retribution would not let himself be caught and killed so easily. He'd gone into hiding immediately, but it was very hard for a shard to hide. So long as it wanted to influence things, the vibrations would be felt. End quote. Lots of great information here. It tells us kind of the state of things as we're leaving them. Retribution is in hiding, at least partially.
Mhm.
I think it's safe to say that Retribution does still want to be able to influence things. And so it's not fully hidden like some of the shards that Taravangian was looking for earlier in the book and couldn't find at all.
Right. But it's also different than how Taravangian was operating as Odium in the last 10 days.
Right, being super hands-on and
Exactly.
present, like lots and lots of influence on the planet. So I think we might pick up with Roshar in the back half and see a world that largely doesn't have a god sort of meddling in
Hmm.
the day-to-day events.
I would agree, and it's the impacts will be felt. All of the terrible and horrific things that odium slash retribution does in the
Yeah.
final moments are going to be impacting our characters, but it won't be like Yasna's having another debate with odium
Yeah.
because that's far too direct and would like expose odium slash now retribution, and he can't be exposed in that way because of what Dalinar did. All of the shard's attention is now on retribution.
Honestly, this might be kind of a nice break for Roshar.
Of course, yeah,
Like,
well, I mean,
it
they need
has
it.
always
Yeah,
had shards being really active, and
mhm.
maybe it's nice for them to just get a break from some, god influence for a while.
It's the only chance that, like Kaladin gives to the heralds, a moment to actually heal, grow, and move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We know for certain that Hoid is dropping into the beginning of Mistborn Era 2 because he is hired as the Ladrian coachman. We hear from the steward, quote, "Well, I can't be too picky," stamping his application, seen as ever since the previous fellow literally ended up driving off a cliff, we've had trouble keeping the position filled, end quote.
Yeah, so this seems to place us in time right before Wax returns to Ellendale, just after his parents and his sister's quote unquote accident in their coach.
And so that brings us to the end of Hoyd's role in Wind and Truth. Of course, there is a tremendous amount of speculation anytime that we talk about Hoyd. What we're going to do going forward is break down each of the characters, bringing in more of their plot specific moments from the book, and also beginning to tie in more of what we learn from Isles of the Emberdark and, future Words of Brandon, bringing all of that stuff together as we look next at everybody's favorite woman from Roshar, Shalon Devar. Thank you so much for listening. You can join us anytime over on Patreon, exclusive access to special episodes, as well as our very special, very cool Discord server. Mainly, though, I look forward to seeing many of you at Dragonsteel Nexus in December, and am excited to share with everybody a lot of the fun stuff we get up to there in the coming months. Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness.
journey before destination.